Bunny girls are perhaps one of the most unique fantasy species that in recent times had been invented. From homebrew, Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder campaigns to the Vieras of Final Fantasy, bunny girls are still a recent addition to the fantasy worlds far and wide, but nonetheless an interesting one. But today I wanna ask the question, how would realistic bunny girls actually work? What kind of biology, culture and societies would they create? And we should start with one of the very obvious things, their rate of reproduction. As half-human, half-rabbit beings, they would have an extremely high rate, because a normal rabbit can birth around 5 youngs on average after just a single month of pregnancy. So even if we halve the amount of offspring and double the gestation period, the population of bunny girls would exponentially expand. Granted, it would be somewhat offset by their lower lifespans, which should be around 30 to 35 years, simply because it's the average lifespan of humans and bunnies added up and then divided by 2. But still, rabbit men would spread rapidly. But we also have to take into account that rabbit men are quite rare, or even non-existent, if we take Final Fantasy XII into account. So perhaps only a fraction of this fantasy species would ever procreate. Perhaps even 1 of 5 has the ability to procreate themselves, so basically the strongest firstborn of the entire litter, as a sort of natural birth control, while the vast amount of rabbit men and bunny girls would simply spend their life without offspring. And even then, the birth rate should still be way higher than in human societies. This expansion of the population would lead to a territorial expansion, and here bunny girls and rabbit men would get lucky, because I believe that they would be essentially flatland dwarves, for lack of a better term, while dwarves dig tunnels and mines through solid rock, far up in the mountains. The bunny girls would inhabit fertile lowlands with black earth and otherwise more easy-to-move soil, in which their subterranean housing would be built. This would also alleviate the need to construct very tall buildings, and it would also grant them a great way of defense. If the entire species lives more or less underground, or at the very least like hobbits, then they would essentially just need to stabilize the tunnels and build drainage systems, instead of having to build far up, which again would bring some issues with stability. And I would also suggest that rabbit men would be incredibly communal, so that perhaps it would be a natural thing to live with a couple others of their own species in just one single room, thus further decreasing the need for housing. Still, the amount of biomass or food the fertile earth can produce is limited, and soon the rabbit men will need to expand. And here's something I never realized: bunny girls and rabbit men would be an incredible warlike species. Their constant hunger for space and resources would constantly drive them ever outwards, and since they have such a high fertility rate, they could easily replace any combat losses in, let's say, half the time it takes a man, because an 18-year-old human would be the equivalent to a 9-year-old rabbit man, and likely the rabbit man will also come with a handful of siblings every single time. In short, bunny girls should be able to sustain attritional warfare, the likes of which would make even the deathcore of Krieg blush. But this doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing, because rabbit men would also develop a culture around this very bleak reality and the need to expand, likely making them a warrior society almost by default, and one that is able to stomach high loss rates. A problem that the rabbit men would also face would be that with their short lifespans, technological progress would be rather limited, simply because the time they have to accumulate knowledge would also be somewhat limited as well. But again, quantity has a quality of its very own, and therefore they would still be a great threat to surrounding nations. And with their strong legs a bunny girl army would be almost predestined to fight with thrusting weapons, such as spears, or maybe as a small phalanx, and spears perhaps with stone tips, perhaps just with a sharpened end, would profit immensely from their ability to lunge forward. This, in combination with the ability to quickly evade counter thrusts, again due to their agility and their hind legs, would make them rather deadly against basically anyone in a one-on-one fight, and especially against humans, who lack this dexterity and the ability to quickly gain space. And bunny girls could perhaps also, after some training, dodge arrows, but as a result of their shorter lives, they should also be bad mages, simply because it takes time to study and learn magic, at least in most fantasy series. Perhaps they have some sort of natural magic, like for example, the ability to sense their relatives in the earth, or find vegetation, even dozens of miles away from any plant. But I don't think that they would cast Fireball and any other advanced spells anytime soon. And if rabbit-man societies can't expand, then they would also be very prone to infighting, and a series of movies with different bunny burrows fighting over what little vegetation is in, let's say, an isolated valley in the desert, would be the bloodiest, most disturbing thing with rabbits since Watership Down. But on the other hand, even with all of the risks associated with them, rabbit-men and their society would still be quite useful. For example, a multi-species empire seeking to secure its border from a equally numerous low-tech enemy, for example orcs and goblins. For example orcs and especially goblins, who are also often depicted as a green tide, so settling a bunch of burrows in the borderlands, where usually orcs and goblins would move through in order to reach the interior of the empire, could lead to a very nasty surprise if the grasslands suddenly burst forth with jumping spearmen, plunging their weapons straight into the orcs' bellies, when the rabbit armies artificially creating a forest made out of pikes, halberds, and perhaps some throwing spears. Additionally, rabbit-men would be great skirmishers, since their evasive legwork would make them very hard to hit by archers, while they could just easily break off any contact with enemy melee units. And they don't even need horses or other mounts, since they are already blessed with strong hind legs. And of course, as excavation specialists, they could even lay ambushes in form of hidden tunnels on otherwise grassy plains with a great overview, perhaps even letting an invading army pass, only to then overwhelm them from behind with their spears. And while you're just noticing the innuendo, I say thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I will see you soon again under my next video. Until then, have a nice day.